Well, good morning. My name is Patrick. So glad to see you here this morning as we start a brand new series. Many of you know that I spent about 15 years living in South Africa, and before I did that, I went on a couple of mission trips there. And on my first trip there, what we would do was we would travel around the country, and we would go into a community and we would work with a church in that community, and we would do things in the schools and do things in the church. And when we did that, we would stay in people's homes that went to the church we were working with. And so I got to travel all around the country, experiencing a lot of different things there. But when you live with people for a week or so, you really kind of get to know the culture and get to know people from there. And so that was just an amazing experience. Well, when we traveled around and stayed in the different homes in the different communities, and we stayed in all kinds of different kinds of houses, right? Some of them were amazing, some of them were kind of average, and some of them were less than average. And so this one particular house, I can remember, I mean, it was amazing. It was like one of those houses you see in the movies. Like when we pulled up to the house, we weren't actually at the house, we were on the road, and on the road there was this driveway, but there was a gate there, right? And you had to push the intercom to let the people know that you were there, so they could open the gate so you could drive up their driveway to get to the house. And their driveway was so long it should have had a street name. It was that long that as you drove up, you drove past, fields with horses and all of these things, and you get to the front there, and there's this big, huge, grand entrance to this house. I mean, it was just amazing, and got to experience that. Other houses we stayed at were kind of normal, average houses that you would expect in different countries, and then there were some houses that we stayed in that were below the poverty line. And this one particular family, I can remember, I don't remember their names or much about the family, but I remember the house. And I remember their generosity. And we stayed there with them. And this family, there were 3 of us guys staying in this house with this family. And the mom and dad of the house spent that week out of their bedroom, and they gave their bedroom to us so that we could stay there. And one particular night, they decided that they would go out and get us KFC. And so the 3 of us, we ate KFC while they ate, I'm not sure what. And I'm not sure how much. And for them, that was a way for them to honor us and to give us something that was a treat for them. And I just realized that, man, there's some generous people in this world. And it's not about how much money you have. It's about what you do with the money that you have. And as most of the people we stayed with in that particular trip and others I went on, most of the people we stayed with were very, very generous. And I just began to learn about this idea of generosity. And that it doesn't matter how much money you have, but it matters what you do with the money that you have. And I began to realize that there's a difference between giving and being generous. In fact, I did some research on this, and I looked it up in the dictionary. It actually defines generosity this way. It says generosity is liberality in giving. So there's a difference. The way I like to say it is this. I like to say generosity is taking giving to the next level. Because there's a difference between just giving, right, and being generous. And the more I look into this, and the more I study this, and the more I learn, the more I realize is that 2 people can give the same amount of money, and for one person, it's just giving. And for the other person, they're being generous. Same amount of money. So it's not about the amount of money. And we're going to kind of get into that more as the series goes on. But the reason why I want to bring this up is because Jesus talked a lot about money. And Jesus wants his followers to be generous people. Now, I know for some of you, you're sitting there thinking, yeah, but I just don't make enough money to be generous. I mean, I want to be generous, and my heart is generous, but man, my wallet can't be, right? My heart is, my wallet can't, right? Some of you are thinking that way. But you know, some of the people we stayed with were just that way. Their wallet couldn't, and yet they did. They somehow found a way to be generous. And so, for others of you, you may have grown up in church, and the church you grew up in, perhaps, for some of you anyway, that you talked about giving. You talked about giving a lot, and you talked about giving to church and giving to charity and giving to all these places, but perhaps you never talked about generosity. And so that's why I want to spend a few weeks in this series talking about generosity. It's because for Jesus, if we're going to follow him, Jesus expected his followers to be generous. And so the more I learn about this, and I'm still learning, the more I learn about it, the more I think Jesus expected that of his followers. And that's what we're trying to do here, is we're trying to inspire people to follow Jesus. That's what we're about here at 419. And so as we're trying to inspire you to follow Jesus, we believe that there's next steps for you to take. Whether you've been following Jesus your entire life, or whether today is your first time ever in church, or somewhere in between. We believe that there's next steps for you to take in terms of you following Jesus. And so perhaps today, we'll start this conversation around possibly taking a next step in terms of generosity. Now, I know some of you, you're already generous, and so if you're a generous person and you're used to that level of giving, I just want to say thank you, good job, keep it up. Today's just an encouragement. For others of you, if you're not quite there yet, perhaps today will be an encouragement or a challenge for you to begin to think about giving and generosity in a new way. And so in order to help us do that, we're going to look at a conversation or a letter that Paul wrote to Timothy. Paul was a major leader in terms of the early church. And so he was a big-time leader. In fact, he wrote lots of different letters, and he started lots of different churches around the Mediterranean rim. And so he wrote a significant portion of our New Testament. And one of the letters he actually wrote 2 letters to his protege, Timothy. And we're going to look at one of them, the first one, here today. At the end of this letter, throughout the letter, Paul's trying to encourage Timothy. At this point, Timothy is the pastor of a church at Ephesus. And so Paul's just trying to say, hey, keep up the good work. And he's trying to encourage him in the work of pastoral ministry there at that church. But he's also trying to challenge him on some things that Timothy needs to be doing. And at the end of the letter, he actually tells Timothy, he says, here's what you should teach the church about giving and generosity. And so if it was good enough for Paul and Timothy, I think it's good enough for us here today as we begin this conversation around generosity. So before we jump into that, one thing real quick is that this letter, Paul is writing to Timothy and saying, Timothy, this is what you should teach the church at Ephesus. And so if you're here today and you're not a follower of Jesus, this is not something we're expecting you to do. You can decide if you want to play along or not. Completely up to you. But if you're a follower of Jesus, then perhaps this is what Timothy would teach you if he were here as the pastor of this church. And so we're just going to kind of jump into their conversation there. So here we go. Paul writes to Timothy. He says, what you need to do, you need to command or instruct or teach those who are rich. Now hang on. That's none of us, right? So we can just put that down and just go home, go have lunch. You want KFC? Paul says, command those who are rich. And I know none of us feel rich. Because when we look around, we see other people who have more than us. So if I can look around and find other people who have more than me, then I know that I'm not rich, but they're rich. The rich people are they. There was a study done, a survey actually, and they surveyed Americans. So this is not outside of America. This is Americans. They did a survey that how much money would it take for you to feel wealthy, for you to feel rich? And the answer came back on average $2.5 million. So your net worth needs to be $2.5 million in order for someone in America to feel rich. At least that was the average. And I don't know where you're at. Maybe your number's a little lower. Maybe your number's a little higher. I'm not sure where you're at in terms of that. But the reality is that most of us, we don't necessarily feel rich. We feel generous because we give from time to time somewhere, something. So we feel generous even though we might not be. But we don't feel rich even though we might be. Even though we probably are. Because if I were to go back to South Africa and invite that family to come here, to see the houses we live in, that we actually own a car, the lifestyle that we live, they would absolutely say that we were rich. So even if you don't feel rich today, maybe just play along. Command those who are rich in this present world, which means, in this present world, which means there's a world that's coming after this world. That there's more to this life, there's more to life than this life. There's something else coming. It says, command those who are rich in this world not to be arrogant, which means there's a tendency for rich people to be arrogant. Now, I'm not saying you're a rich, arrogant person, right? But I think most of us know one, right? Because there's a tendency. When you get more money than other people, there's a tendency. There's a temptation to be arrogant. So Paul says to Timothy, command them not to be, nor to put their hope in wealth. Because when you get money, your tendency is to put your hope in wealth. Your tendency is to have your hope go there. And so it's as if Paul is saying to Timothy, hey, warn people. Just like drug companies put warning labels on their things, right? And they, you've seen the commercials for this drug or that drug, and it's going to fix the illness. But then at the end of the commercial, they say, warning, may cause, and then the list is so long, you're like, I don't know if I want to do this or not. That's kind of what Paul is saying to Timothy. In fact, Andy Stanley in his book, How to Be Rich, he says this way. He says about wealth and being rich, he says, here we go. He says, here's the warning label for being rich and being wealthy. He says, may cause arrogance. While taking this medicine, extra precautions should be taken not to offend people. If taken for prolonged periods, may impair perception, causing hope to migrate. It's just his way of saying what Paul was saying to Timothy and what Timothy was supposed to teach the church at Ephesus. It says, for those of you who are rich, Paul says to Timothy, teach them to be careful, not to be arrogant, and not to have your hope go into your wealth or your riches. Back to the verse, Paul says to Timothy, he says, your wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God. Instead of putting their hope in wealth, put their hope in God. He says, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Instead of having your hope go into your riches, go into your wealth, he says, put your hope in God, because God is the one that provided it in the first place. God is the one who blessed. God is the one who gave you the ability to make wealth and acquire wealth. So instead of putting your hope in the wealth, in the riches, Put your hope in the one who provided that in the first place. Paul says, and he provided it for our enjoyment. And so enjoy it. He's telling rich people, enjoy being wealthy, enjoy being rich. But Paul doesn't stop there, because it's more to it than that. He goes on, he says this. He says, so command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous, there's our word, and willing to share. Paul's saying to Timothy, hey, here we go. Instead of putting your hope in wealth and in riches, put your hope in God. And the way you do that, right, the prescription for that, he says, is to be rich in good deeds and to be generous, willing to share. In other words, here's your riches, here's your wealth. Go enjoy that, but it's not all meant for your enjoyment. It's meant to be shared with others. In other words, you're blessed to be a blessing. And the wealth and the riches and the blessing that God has given you is meant for you to enjoy, yes, but it's not just meant for you. It's meant so you can be a conduit and so that you can bless and encourage, be rich in good deeds, and be generous to other people. So that's what Paul says to Timothy. Then he says, finishes it up this way. He says, in this way, if you do all of that, he says, you will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. In other words, if you behave this way, if you treat your riches this way, if you're generous and you're rich in good deeds and generous toward other people, he said, when you're doing that, you're laying up treasure for that life to come that he mentioned earlier. So you can either be rich in this life or that life. This life is temporary. That life is eternal. Which life do you want to be rich in? Paul thinks Timothy would agree. Jesus would agree. That it would be more beneficial for each of us. That it would be more beneficial for Jesus' followers. Instead of being rich in this life, be rich in that life. And so if you're going to keep your heart and your hope from migrating to your wealth, migrating to your riches, well, then we have to have a certain understanding that it's not all meant for us. Yes, we're to enjoy it, but we're also to be a conduit. We're to be generous and rich in good things. And so here at 419, one of the things that we try to do here each and every week is to make what we talk about applicable. We want you not just to come here and hear a message and then go home and do nothing with it. We think as you begin to follow Jesus, and as you continue to follow Jesus and hopefully are inspired to continue to do that and to take next steps towards that. And so we want to provide you and be real specific about the next step from this week. And so what we want to do is provide you with an opportunity to be generous. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take up a special offering on December the 8th. And we're going to provide envelopes for you. They're going to look something like this. And you can pick one up on the way out here today. And we want you to take that home, and we don't want you to bring it back next week. We want you to bring it back on December the 8th. And we're going to provide an opportunity for you to practice generosity. Now, for some of you, you're already generous, and I just want to say thank you and encourage you and to continue in that. For others of you, this may be a start, a kickstart, if you will, for you to start practicing generosity. You've been giving perhaps up until now, and perhaps this ceremony or this event, this giving opportunity will help kickstart you on your road, on taking a next step toward generosity. So we want you to take that envelope home. We want you to think through it, pray through it, talk with your spouse about it, look at your finances, and think about that. Now, some of you are thinking, And this is just an interesting way for him to ask about money. Please just give. Like, let's go home, right? So that is not our heart's intention. And so for those of you who might think that, we have another opportunity for you. So as you came in today, you may have noticed a tree out there, and we have a giving tree that we have set up, and we have we've become aware of some children in the community that may not get Christmas presents, and so we've provided an opportunity for you to take a tag and buy Christmas presents for them. Now, if you go take a tag, we ask that you bring those gifts back on December 8th, because December 8th, we're going to have a big celebration about taking a step toward generosity. But this isn't something we want you to just do because I got up here and asked you to do it. We want this to be something that you think through, that you pray through, that you talk with your spouse through, or whoever. We want this to be something that's from your heart, not just because somebody asked for something. Because it's more than just giving. It's about being generous. And so if you take a tag, we ask that you put your name out there so we know who took what tag. And so we want you to bring those gifts back on December 8th unwrapped. Okay? Now, we made this announcement in the first service, and some of you took some on your way in, and we are out of tags. And so we are. We are working already. We are working towards getting more names. And so if your desire is to get one of those tags, we are working toward getting more names for next week. But we are out of names, correct? Out of names?
Yes.
We're out of names for this week. And so if that's what you desire, come back next week and you can hopefully we'll have some more names for you to get a tag for that. But that's an opportunity for those of you who think, okay, he's just asking for money and I want to do that rather than give the gift on December 8th. For others of you on December 8th, you don't want to give physically a check or cash. You want to do an online option. We're going to have that opportunity available for you. But December 8th is going to be a way that we celebrate taking a next step in our generosity. And for those of you who still think, okay, this is all about getting money and getting things, I would just encourage you, if that's what you think, then on December 8th, give somewhere else. Go find your favorite charity. Go find a neighbor that's in need. Go find somewhere, something to give to. Because our heart's desire isn't just to get something from you. Our heart's desire is to have something for you. And as a follower of Jesus, Jesus wants something for you. He wants your heart. And he knows that if your heart is connected to your money, then it's not good for you. And he knows that in order to put your hope in God, you've got to learn how to give and learn how to give generously. So that's our heart's desire here today and for this series. And the reason why we're doing this generosity campaign is because hopefully for some of you, it's going to be a kickstart. Because up until now, you may have been giving here and there for somewhere in something. And God's going to do something in your heart over these next few weeks as you begin to seek Him and to think and to pray through all of this. Because as a follower of Jesus, He doesn't want you to just give. He wants you to be generous. And as you're generous, I think He'll continue to bless you more and more. And you continue to make a difference and make an impact to the people in the community around you. And together, if we do that collectively, imagine the impact we could have in this community. So I'd encourage you, on the way out, to take an envelope, to take it home, to think through it, and to pray through it about what Jesus might have you do in taking the next step toward generosity. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much, God, for your Son who came for us. God, that you were generous first. So God, thank you. God, I pray for each and every one of us, God, that you would give us the wisdom to understand how you want us to participate in this generosity campaign. God, then just give us the courage to follow through. That you might help us take a next step toward generosity, toward following you in a deeper, closer way. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.